Welcome, welcome. I have a special guest today. Nina's going to join me talking about how to get visible within podcasting and really setting yourself up as that expert so that you can be a podcast guest more. Hi, I'm Izzy Nally, and this is the Business Growth Lab. I also have a podcast called Magnified Abundance where we are talking about expanding our minds to bring more abundance in. So, podcasting and why we should be on a podcast, why we should put ourselves out there and use all of these other people's audiences. Nina, tell us why we should be thinking more about this.
Hello, Easy. Thank you so much for having me. And before we talk about the benefits of being a podcast guest, let's clarify what podcast guesting is because some people might be maybe confused or they are not very clear. Maybe they think they should have their own podcast in order to get booked on other podcasts, but it's not like that. So I don't have a podcast and I am getting booked. So anyone out there listening to us can get themselves booked on other shows. And also, I think it's important to clarify that we can use this as a business strategy in order to grow our business. And we are talking here about those podcasts where we are going to share your expertise. Because, of course, let's say, for example, if I'm a vegan, I'm not, but let's say that I'm a vegan and I will be featured on those podcasts interested in, how to get started with veganism and things like that. But because that is not linked to my business, it's not going to bring me any benefits except for sharing my lifestyle or things like that. So today we will be focused on getting booked on those podcasts that will help us grow ourselves and our businesses.
I think that's such a good point, right? Like always starting from making sure that we are talking about the same thing, that we understand what it is to guest podcast. And I do see that a lot where people create their own podcast and it's a ton of time to create your own podcast. It's a lot of consistency that has to be there as well. And it's so much easier to just go use other people's podcasts instead of putting one more thing on your list. And there's those added benefits of using someone else's audience that's already been built versus trying to create your own audience and that time it takes to build that up. Someone else has done all the work for you and you get to go guest. And then you mentioned too that don't just talk about anything, like make sure that it's actually
Oh,
beneficial. It's going to come back to what you need to be talking about. And I do see that a lot. I will post in a group and I'll be like, hey, I'm looking for guests on my podcast. And people just say, yes, me, I'll do it. And they're not telling
interested.
me, right? Like they're not telling me what they want to talk about. And they're not even sure what my podcast is. They just think I'm going to, what we call the spray and pray method, where I'm just going to throw all of my information out and hope. But there's strategy behind this, right? So tell us more about like these benefits of like actually getting the right audience.
Oh, yes. Before we get there, actually, I did not mention the benefits. So, first of all, you are going to establish yourself as an authority. So, let's say,
Mhm.
for example, I'm looking for an email marketer, right? So, maybe I'm going to post in a few Facebook groups asking people, who would you recommend? And then people will list some names. And then, of course, I'm going to do my own due diligence and do a little bit of research. So, do you think I'm going to hire someone who's not featured anywhere, or someone who has been featured in some outlets, maybe podcast interviews? So, here is a little bit of food for thought. And then I think what's very important is that usually podcast listeners are also ready to buy. And then when they are listening to you as a podcast host, they will automatically trust that you as a host will bring only selected guests. You are not
Yes.
going to accept anyone on your podcast. So therefore, there is this transferred trust that you are going to benefit from. And then obviously you will have the opportunity to strengthen that relationship. And I've seen other partnership developing from a podcast feature. So this is why I think it's important for you to test this, if this is going to work for you, to see if you like being a podcast guest, because you are going to get some benefits.
Agreed. And I think there's also this build up too. Like maybe the first couple times you're a podcast guest, you might not see the results that you were hoping for because there is again strategy to picking a podcast to be a guest on and something that's worth your time, worth your investment. I think a lot of us don't see that early on. If when we have more time, we're like, yes, I'll do anything. But that can also be beneficial too, right? To say, hey, yes, I've been a guest on 3 or 4 shows. I'm not new to this. So there's also that learning curve as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think podcast guesting, your goals depend on where you are in your business, but also in your speaking journey. Because if you are someone like I was, terrified of speaking, my goal was not to, land the biggest podcast or to get 1,000 subscribers. My goal was to move past those fears of speaking in front of an audience. And it's very important to know exactly where you are and be clear with your goals. And also, I think in order for you to be a successful podcast guest is simplified. You need to have the right message and you need to put yourself in front of the right audience who's ready to hear your message. But in order for you to get there, you need to practice, as you said.
You do. You do need to practice. And I love that you talked about like your goals of being on that. And that is okay, right? Like if your goal is like, hey, I just need to get some experience under my wings. And then also being realistic, if your goal is more subscribers, again, the strategy to making sure that you're choosing a podcast where that is possible so that we're not going in with an expectation that's not aligned to what's actually possible.
Yes, because I've seen podcast hosts who are not going to allow you to share a freebie. This is their format, so you won't be able to share it.
Yes, yes. And that being said, like, so you're an expert, you help people do this. I think I would love for the audience to really hear like what your journey was to becoming in this role of how are you helping people? You were telling me this beautiful story of listening to the radio as a child and how that has shaped and developed you to this space.
Yes, of course, it took me a while until I was able to connect the dots. But I started my business because I wanted more flexibility around my kids' schedule. So I used to work for the government in my country. I am based in Romania, and I was relying on that background. So when I was pregnant, I moved to a different city, so I could not go back to my previous job. I was a stay-at-home mom for more than 5 years. And then I tried different things. And then once we had to move again to a different city due to my new husband's job, I decided, okay, I'm going to get a job and I will be happy. But guess what? I wasn't. I felt so trapped and I quit only 9 days in. And then I just had this feeling that, you know what? I feel that I could support other moms who are a few steps ahead of me and could use some support. So I thought that maybe I will help them with some admin work. And this is how I started. But then I felt it was a lot of competition. So I decided that I need to niche down. So I tried different things. But when I stumbled on podcast pitching, I was like, oh my God, this is something I can do. I would really love to do it. And I found an amazing client. We are still friends to this day. And I started working with her. She referred me to a friend of hers, and I really loved this podcasting world. And then, as they tell you so while I was doing this, I was terrified. I was like, no way. I'm not going to be on podcast. I was barely showing up on my social media. I was like, nope, this is not for me. This is only for those successful people, for those who are extroverts. So, no, I won't even consider this. Actually, my first client invited me to be a guest on her podcast, and I said no. And then I realized that you need to stand out somehow. So I started to, look for my stories, for my why. And I knew that is was to help other moms grow their businesses. And I knew that it was to help them by using their voices. But I was wondering, like, why is this important for me? And then I remember that when I was a kid and my country was a communist country until I was 10 years old. And my grandfather, I think he was a visionary, but he didn't realize that. He was listening to this radio, even if it was not allowed. This radio was broadcasted from the US, and they were sharing stories of people who defected the country or stories of other people living there in the US or Canada. And I was so impressed. I was so curious how it would feel like to live in another country, how it would feel to meet other people who talk another language, how is their culture. Like, this really sparked my curiosity. And then I realized that when I'm listening to podcasts, especially that I'm usually doing another activity that doesn't require my brain. So, right, you do your dishes, I do like the laundry, or maybe I exercise, and my mind is free to wander, is free to dream big. And I realized, you know what? This is why I of podcasting, because when I'm listening to podcasts, I let myself inspired, I let myself encouraged by other people, I connect with their stories, I can dream big. And this is why I love so much working with my clients, helping them put their vision into a podcast or being a guest on other people's shows.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story. I love that, and it does, right? Like it reminds us of maybe another memory. It sparks
Yeah.
a thought or creativity. Like as you were saying that, I was like, yes. Like as I was a kid, my grandpa would get on the radio stations and he would find these like offers where it was like, hey, we'll give you 2 free tickets to this play or show in exchange for you come back onto the radio and give us your review. And he would make me do this as a kid, like go watch the Johnny
Wow.
Appleseed play. And then I would get on the radio and tell them what I thought about it. And it does like all these little things as we're kids
So
are
cool.
shaping, right? Um,
Exactly.
and so I think that's the beauty of podcasts because it's allowing us to listen in to a conversation. And as humans, that is how we learn is by listening to conversations. And we typically, most of us love it. And podcasts are huge. Everyone's always saying, like, hey, what podcast are you listening to? And so to be in that world is what you're helping business owners and entrepreneurs do. Now, today we're also going to go over, you're going to share with us your 5-step framework. Tell us a little bit about this framework, like an overview of how you formed it, why it's important, so that we can we can take some tips away today from your expertise.
Exactly. So my framework is called pitch. Easy to remember. And I wanted to offer to my clients a system easy to implement because most of them would feel overwhelmed just by the idea that, oh, there is so much work to do. But then when you break these things into smaller steps, you see that these are actionable steps and it's not actually that hard.
Awesome.
So, yes, let's go through every step. So, P stands for prep your message. Then we have I is identify relevant podcasts for you. Then we have the T, tailor each pitch. We have the C, create a system that works for you. And finally, we have the H, handle the interview. And now let's start with our first step. I said prep your message. As you mentioned before, you have so many people just saying, I want to be featured, and they don't do research. And maybe I've seen people just posting their one sheet and that's it. But like, come on, it's not enough. When you prep your message, you need to be very clear on what you are an expert in and what you want to be known for, right? Because I could, for example, share about a lot of things. I could share about, I don't know, maybe how I was a stay-at-home mom for more than 5 years. But as I mentioned before, this is not going to help my business. Yes, it's somehow related, but still, it's not something that I'm an expert in. I'm not selling anything related to this story of motherhood or things like that. So it's very important for you when you prep your message to have all this customer journey mapped out. So we start with your expertise, then we move to your freebie. Like, when are you getting featured on those podcasts? What is a free resource that you could offer to those listeners if the host will allow you? And then how can you connect that freebie with your paid offer? What are you going to do on your back end of your business that you will spark those people who are going to sign up for your freebie, their curiosity to want to learn more from you, and finally to buy from you. So you need to have this already mapped out, because otherwise it's going to be confusing for them. But I think I'm going to share this in step 5. So first, it's clarity around your message. Then I want you to prepare your bio, because once you are going to start to pitch yourself, or maybe you are going to find a lot of forms that you will need to fill out in order to be featured, it's going to be easier to have this bio that you can easily tweak, so you don't have to start from scratch every single time. And then I think it's important for you to have some updated headshots that the host is going to use to create those promotional assets to promote your interview. And then it's also important for you to have ready your one sheet. I've seen hosts who are going to ask you for it, so it's very handy if you already have it. And then also, as I mentioned, think about keep your links handy, the link to your freebie, the link to your offers. Keep them there in case, and your social media links. Keep everything handy. Yes, so that when someone will ask for your information, you don't need to, click 100 times together all your links. You just going to copy paste them and you're done. So this is your first step.
Agreed. And And these are things that I think we can easily do by ourselves, but let's be honest, a lot of
Absolutely.
times we need someone to hold the space to to allow us to get it done, that accountability. Now, I will say you can go on to Canva. There are lots of templates for one
Absolutely.
sheets. If you know your offer and your offer is positioned to sell, meaning it is hitting a pain point, an immediate pain point, it is solving a problem. And then again, I love you mentioned working backwards. That is something that I definitely teach, that your freebie should not be something random. It should be
Yeah.
tied to your offer. It should be this funnel, this system, this flow, and that your podcast guesting is fitting into that. Now, I love so much that you said in making sure that you have a message for someone's audience that they want to hear is also important. Not just getting on and be like, this is important. You need to know this. Listen to me. It's hey, I have something that could really help your audience. I think your audience would want to hear this because, and learning how to pitch, I think even me, like we all need to have someone that we can back and forth with that, to see it from someone else's point of view, because we ourselves will have blinders on when we're just looking at our own things. So, and I'm going to mention you've got a freebie resource for us at the end as well, and the link is in the show notes. So, tell us too, like real quick, what's your freebie resource and why they need it?
Yes, so it's going to be perfect for this step 2 because it is a tracker, a podcast guesting tracker, where you are going to jot down every detail that you are going to find, and we are going to talk about it a little bit. So it's important for you to start with this spreadsheet, because I also want to give you a little bit of homework. Maybe let's start with 10 podcasts that you are going to put on that list, and you are going to start pitch yourself. And it's important because when you do the research, I personally like to use some of the details I find on their website or social media and put them into my pitch, because this way is not going to feel as cold and just like a spammy email they are going to get. So here in step number 2, we are going to identify the relevant podcast for you. So what is relevant for you? First of all, the audience. There needs to be an aligned audience. If, for example, let's say I'm not going to put myself in front of a group of gardeners, right? Because unless they have businesses, and they will be interested in podcast pitching, but if they are interested in, I don't know, like tools or tricks they use, it's not going to be relevant for them to share about my podcast guesting strategy, right? So it's important for you to know exactly who your audience is and what their needs are, because you will want to put yourself in front of them. Then it's important for you to have this alignment of your topics and the overall podcast theme. Let me give you an example. For example, I had a client who decided to stop using Instagram. And she did a series of episodes on how she initially stopped using it for 30 days. Then she only had a team member handling her Instagram. And then she, for example, right now she only has this 9 grid, and that's it. Like she's not posting, she's not there at all. But she did a series of episodes sharing how she focused on her podcast instead and SEO. And still, she had people pitching her, I want to teach your audience how to grow their Instagram accounts. And she was like, don't you take a look at my podcast, at my previous episodes to see that I'm not interested in this topic? So this is why it's important for you to look to the previous episodes, because there might be some misalignment and you don't want to waste your time. Also, when you are doing this cold pitch, because I feel there is a difference between this cold pitch where you are just researching those podcasts using different methods, and then this cold pitch, this warm pitch, where you are going to reach out to people that you know already. Maybe you are in a membership with them in the same program that you are taking. So there is a little bit of familiarity, and it's going to be easier for you to reach out to them. And you don't have to send them this pitch that is like very formal. You can maybe have a conversation. I've even got these invites to be on their podcast while we were having a coffee chat on a Zoom call. So yes, sometimes it's very important. If people see you share your passion and your story, and if it's a good fit for them, they will invite you.
Yes.
So another thing that you need to make clear is they take interviews, because I've heard podcasters complaining that I have a solo podcast and I'm still getting pitched. People want to get featured on my podcast and I don't do interviews. Like, that's crazy. So you need to pay attention. And also, it's very important to make sure that when you find a good podcast, it's still active. Because if they stopped releasing new episodes like 6 months ago, why are you going to send them an email? I've seen people who stopped a podcast, they started another one, and they were still getting pitches for the old one.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I love what you're talking about too, is taking a more active approach in creating opportunities rather than, like I was saying, like I'll go into a group and I'll be like, who wants to guest? And relying only on those is not a strategic approach. Saying that, hey, I'm going to reach out to, as you said, 10 podcasts each month, because that doesn't mean that you're going to get all of them. But to reach out to them each month is an active strategy of marketing.
Yes, yes. And as I mentioned, as a business owner, you are networking, you are meeting people. You could just ask them, if they don't have a podcast, do they know of anyone who has a podcast, and they could make you an introduction. So it doesn't have to be always this cold pitch that you are going to send. So there are different ways for you to pitch. And then also, for if you are looking to find this podcast, if you want to, let's say, every week to pitch yourself to 5 podcasts, then what you can do is use your favorite podcasting app as a research tool. So you are going to use some keywords that are relevant for you, and this is how you can come up with podcasts in your industry. Even Google top 100 podcasts in your industry, and then from there, once you are going to, if you are an Apple user, I am not, but on my desktop, I was able to download iTunes. So still, I can use this trick. So when you find a podcast on Apple, then at the bottom, you are going to see other relevant or suggested podcasts. So you can start taking a look at those as well. And this is how you are going to find a lot of podcasts. But again, you need to do the research and pay attention to the details we mentioned, the audience, if they are still active, if they are taking interviews, and if your topic is a good fit for them.
Yes. And I think this is so great too on so many levels. Like, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, learning from my own lessons, I would say go guest on tons of podcasts. Learn from their processes, right? Like what you liked, what you didn't like, the length of the sessions. There's so many different things, and making sure that there is a need for your industry as well. Like within business, trying to create something that doesn't exist can be way harder than entering an industry that already exists and people are looking for things. So everything you're saying is so useful, not only for podcasting, but marketing in general. Like these new habits and skills of doing the research and looking at what other people are doing and making sure that you fit in and how you fit in. For business owners, this is time consuming. So from your perspective of like, how can we, excuse me, when one either hire to work with you, or is it that they have a virtual assistant that helps with this? Like, how can we find better processes for business owners to be able to do all of this work? Because that could be time consuming just to go look for all of these and then to actually guest on them too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So right now I teach a 3-hour workshop where we sit down and we go through all these details that I mentioned. I will show you exactly step by step how I do, um, for example, my one sheet, how to come up with questions, how to find this podcast. I will show you exactly how I'm like typing on Google, for example, and things like that. But then, yes, you could hire a VA to help you once you have everything, like every step very clear. There are things that you as a guest need to do. For example, your VA is not going to find the best topics for you, right? You need to come up with those. But yes, based on what you are going to guide her, but you need to know what to ask her for, right? So this is why it's important for you to have a full understanding of the process so that you can teach your VA, and then she can search this podcast for you in order to free some time, definitely.
That's such a good
Because it
point.
can
Like
take,
we have right? Like we have to do that work first. We cannot expect a
yes,
virtual assistant
yeah,
to figure that out for us.
yes, especially if she does not have experience in this podcasting area. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
then let's move to step number 3, and this is tailor each pitch. And I think here is very important for you to start with the host name, because I've seen people starting with just hello, hey there. So everyone could tell that this is not a personalized email. No one wants to be just a number on someone else's list, right? So I think it's very important when you will find the podcast name, you will automatically find the host's name as well. So why don't you start with that? And then another thing that I want to help you understand and use it from now on, whether we talk about podcast pitching or we talk about any other collaboration opportunity, is for you to make a connection with that host. So here is where all this research will come in handy. So whether you find something relevant on their website or on their social media, think how can you relate to that specific thing. What are some things that you have in common? What are some passions that you see that you have in common? And sometimes I've seen hosts who don't really post on social media. They are not active on social media. And this is when it's very important for you to listen to 2, 3 episodes. I listen to them on like 2x speed. So it's not going to take me a lot of time, and I'm going to pay attention to the things that are relevant to me, and I will mention those, because this is how I want to connect with the host. Just imagine that you are going to a party, right? Someone is inviting you to a party, but you don't know the host. So when you get there and you ring the doorbell and the host will show up, like, what do you say? I want to have fun on your party, right? You don't say that. You take a look at the host and you say something nice, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe you ask the friend who brought you there, you ask a few things about the host so you can start a conversation. So for me, this pitch is actually a conversation starter. So what I don't put in a pitch are those statements like, I want to be a guest on your podcast, or I have a client who is going to be the best fit for your podcast. No, there is no way for me to know that, because I can do an assessment based on the information I find online, but I do not know what their goals are, I don't know what their vision is for their podcast, right? So I cannot say that I have the best podcast guest for you, but I can ask you, hey, I see that you talk about this and that. Do you think that having a guest that will share about XYZ would be beneficial for your listeners, or things like that? So, what I like to do is to start a conversation.
Yes.
And then also be specific about your expertise, as I mentioned in the beginning, because I've seen pitches where they will send like 10 different topics, all different, and then the host will have to pick one. Like, they don't have the time. Like, you tell me what you want to talk about, and then I will decide if it's a good fit or not, but I'm not going to go through those 10 and pick one. Or I've seen other people just sharing a lot of things about themselves, and then at the end they don't make an ask, they don't share exactly what is they want to talk about. So again, what is this? So this
Yes.
is why it's important for you to be clear. So get to know them, start a conversation, and make the ask, but be specific. This is what I
Agreed.
would put
Agreed.
in a pitch.
And tailoring those is so important. So I did a little series a while back of like people starting over.
Yes.
And I had people from all different types of businesses were able to talk about their story, but at the same time promote their business. And it was taking a different angle. But if no one was listening or following, they wouldn't know that, and they wouldn't know how that conversation was growing and then settling down. And agreed. I love the analogy of going to a party and not knowing who the host is, because I've actually done that too many times, and I'll be talking to the host not knowing it's the host, and then I feel like I'm so behind. Um and
Mhm.
yes, like you need to have that connection, because it's amazing when you have a conversation ahead of time, when you get to know each other, right? Like the conversation is going to go so much better. Who wants to listen to a
Absolutely.
conversation of an awkward conversation versus, hey, we've hung out, we've talked about some things before, we're going to talk about it again, and know and look forward to it. That excitement shows up. So there's the energy behind the conversations during the actual podcast as well.
Yes, it will be different. Yes, yes. And then moving on to step number 4 is create a system. And again, here is where the tracker is handy again, because when I say create a system, is not enough for you to just send the pitch and then forget about it. You need to send some follow-ups, but then how can you remember when you pitched the that host, or right, because for it depends on your schedule. Some people would like to do a little bit of work every single day. I like to work in like batches, like I like 90 minutes of work to make sure that I can get a lot of
Yeah.
work done. And you will have to remember, what did they say? Because you don't want to follow up with someone who said, yes, I want to have you on my podcast, right? You don't want to send the same pitch, the same follow-up email to someone who did not respond. So that's why this tracker is going to be handy for you, because there is a column where you will put the date. When you will follow up, you will track the responses that you are going to get. And then maybe you will have other hosts who will tell you I'm done with the season, come back to me in 3 months, because it's then when I will record for my next season. Or I have all my guests lined up for this year, come back to me next year. Are you going to come back? Are you going to remember to do what they say? So it's important for you to put this information somewhere, and a tracker, a spreadsheet is perfect for that.
Agreed.
So
And
as
taking responsibility, right? Because so many of these podcast hosts, that's not their one and only job. They are also running a business in tandem with that. So keeping in mind that they might not have an assistant that's going to be following up with you, especially if they have multiple people applying, you're not their top priority. So making sure that you take the responsibility to follow up. I love that.
Oh, absolutely. And I've had hosts telling me, thank you so much for following up, because this was happening in my life or my business.
Mhm.
I didn't have the time to get back to you. And if you follow up, they will get this reminder, oh, I like this person. Let me get back to them now, because last time, as you said, they have a business, they have a family, maybe they have other things
Mhm.
to do. So maybe they won't remember. So it's your job to send that follow-up email and reconnect with them. But again, not being pushy, just following the conversation.
Yes. 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 And being understanding. I love
And
that. Right.
then
Like for
finally,
me, it happens
handle
all the
the
time.
interview. Yeah. Of course, we are humans. Yes. So handle the interview means that you already listened to a few episodes, so you will know what to expect. And then, as you said, some of them will have a workflow in place, others might not have. So you will have to be the one who is going to ask for the Zoom link, or maybe they use StreamYard or whatever tools they use. Because, and especially today when more are using video podcasts, right? You don't want to show up in your PJs thinking that, yeah, it's just an audio podcast, so I don't need to look, put up. And you show up in your PJs and then you realize that, hey, this is a video podcast. So make sure that you have all the details. Make sure that you ask the questions to be prepared,
Mhm.
because sometimes they might use only the audio recording, but they will use some snippets of the video recording for their social media. So that's important to know. And then also, as we said, make sure your topic is a good fit. Feel free to ask them if it's allowed for you to share a freebie. If not, see what other call to action might be allowed. Make sure that you have some stories to share that are relevant. And yes, I think, as you said, this connection, when you do the research and you find like a connection point, it's going to help you start a good conversation. You are going to be more relaxed. You are not going to be that tense person that is just asking, or not, that is just expecting questions, right? You can also ask that host some questions. I've seen that and I really like conversation. So yeah,
Yeah,
this
and
is
I'd say
what I will say
too,
to mind.
right, to keep in mind, because I think one of the other things I see people do too is they treat it as if it's a one-off event. And keeping in
Yeah,
mind that as you do this, that person also knows other podcast people and they might refer you.
exactly.
They might invite you back again. So keeping these things in
Yes.
mind too, that it's building a relationship.
Absolutely. And then once the interview is over and you are not recording, ask them how can you support them, or ask them, are there any collaborations that you could develop? Help them to promote the episode, because sometimes people are so busy. The episode will be released in 1 week, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months.
Yes.
You never know because, yeah, they have different schedules. So it's important for you to do your part of the work and share the episode because it's also your work, your time. So why wouldn't you share it?
Yes, I love that. And then we have one more step. So step 5, tell us what we should
That
do.
was no,
Oh,
that was handle the interview. So we had
handle the
create
interview.
the system, yes, and then handle the interview.
Perfect. And so I love that. So thank you. Yes, the before, the during, the after, and
Yeah,
how to really I love systems. I'm like always if there's a process that we can use and knowing processes too that the framework is there, you can shift, you can adapt, but it will make it so much
absolutely.
easier.
Yes, because you don't have to think about every single day. So, what am I supposed to do right now? You will know once. So, I have my message figured out, I have my bio, my one sheet, I can move to research. Then, maybe the next, I will research 10 podcasts. Maybe next week, I'm going to pitch those podcasts. And what I've noticed that it's a good thing for me to do is, for example, write the draft emails, and then the second day I will take another look at them because mistakes can happen, spelling errors might happen. So yes, and also pay attention that you are adding the right name when you are
Mhm.
pitching a specific podcast. Make sure you are using the right email address. I've
Yes.
seen podcast hosts complaining that hey, my name is not X. I'm getting so many emails, and people are using other names because they are just a name on the list, and you don't want to do that. This is why
Yes.
it's also important for you, if you have the time, to connect with them on social media before, follow
Mhm.
them, comment on a few posts.
Agreed, agreed. I think it goes back to,
Yeah.
like, who loves getting those messages in your DMs, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn,
Oh,
Instagram, where it's like, "Hey, I would love this, blah, 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 blah," and it's so spammy that you, like, almost don't wanna respond to it, versus if someone said, "Hey, Nina, I see you have a podcast. I've been listening to the past couple episodes. I really love this. I would love to be a guest and speak to your audience about X, Y, and Z. Do you have a process or something that I can start and get on your podcast to talk about that?" I would answer that
exactly.
message far more because it
Absolutely.
seems personal.
Exactly. You are treating me as a human, right? I'm not just someone on your list. And that's
Yes,
important.
because right, like you have a podcast, you're getting a million messages, people are
Oh,
spamming.
yes, I bet.
Yes, right? So being aware of
Yeah,
that.
I'm curious, what's the worst pitch that you got? Do you
um
remember?
Yeah, I think you've kind of you touched on it at one point where someone was like, "Hey, I'd like to come speak on your podcast." And I'm like, "Okay, what would you like to speak about?"
Mhm,
Well, I just want to tell them about my business. And it's the very self-serving ones where it's like, and I've been flat
mhm.
out like, they've been rude to me and being like, "No, I'm going to do this." And I'm like, "No, no, no, you are not in charge." um, Thankfully, I don't
Exactly.
get that many of those anymore, but I've had some interesting
Mhm.
ones. Um, or people that are more demanding is really interesting to me too.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, awesome. Well, Nina, thank you so much for one, sharing your wisdom. Two, you shared your
Of
framework.
course.
And then
My
three, you've got
pleasure.
a free resource. Yeah. And you've got this free resource
Because
for us. You even gave us a homework assignment.
yes, and it doesn't have to be podcast interviews. You can use any other speaking opportunities. Maybe it's a summit because you
Yeah.
are just getting started and you have the opportunity to pre record your video if you are terrified of speaking. maybe start with that. Maybe it's just a Facebook group, like a small community where you can share your expertise.
Mhm.
So, because this is going to allow you to get better at speaking, to get more comfortable being in front of a camera, having a conversation with a host.
For sure, and
So,
I
it
I love
will
that.
help you.
Yeah, because summits are essentially like a podcast, or it could be
Exactly.
teaching in people's groups. That's how I started. I was like, "Hey, can you come teach in my group?" And it's providing a resource for my clients. And it's been a beautiful
Yes,
experience helping the people who are in my group and providing this visibility as well.
exactly. It's so important for you to share about your business, but as you said, to also be helpful, not just self promote yourself. No one is interested in that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, initially, I mean, when I started and when I was not only afraid of speaking, but I was afraid that if I'm going to share too much, people are not going to buy from me. Because, yeah, I had no idea how to be a business owner. I had so many insecurities, but it's not about that. When you help one people, maybe that person is not going to buy from you, but maybe they will tell to someone else, or maybe there is someone else who is going to buy from you. Because me, like, I also, listen to podcasts. I am taking advantage of free resources. So why wouldn't other people do the same when it comes to what I'm offering, right? But then there will be people who are going to buy from me, and I will buy from other people when I'm interested.
Agreed,
So
agreed.
it
Having
goes both ways.
that reciprocal energy is
Yeah.
so incredibly important. We do have one comment. So Siobhan said, "Great discussion. I have plans to start a podcast called Porch Podcast." Pat, her husband, and are just starting those thoughts. And I think that's so great. Like, it is a conversation, and whether you are going to be on a podcast or start a podcast, you have to know who your audience is and why they would take their
Yes.
time to listen, because we have a lot of
Yeah.
things to choose from. People are always telling me, "Oh, go listen to this podcast." And I'm like, "Well, I'm in the middle of listening to an audiobook right now. I am also in a
Mhm.
training. I'm doing my PhD. Like, I've got a lot of things I'm balancing. So, why
Yeah.
should I? How is it going to benefit me to listen?" And we might know the audience doesn't have a ton of things that they're listening to. So maybe they need something. So, taking those things into mind, that although it might be free for them to listen to the podcast or listen to you, there needs to be a benefit in why they're exchanging their time to listen and what they're getting out of it.
Yes, and if you have any doubts, I would start doing some marketing research, maybe invite some current or past clients or potential clients just to have a conversation, like nothing to pitch. Just ask them about their dreams, their aspirations, their struggles, their challenges, because this is what is going to help you craft those podcast interviews or those episodes if you are a host.
Yep.
So post in a few Facebook group, post on your social media profiles and ask for people's feedback because it's important. Otherwise, you might just do some work in vain and we don't have time for that.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I know, and I feel like we could continue talking for hours, because there's so much more to being a business owner than
Oh,
just selling the product and fulfilling the service. This is part of marketing and a marketing strategy. This is part of expanding your reach and making sure that people know you exist first and foremost. But then, to, like, as we said, to provide value is so incredibly important. There's a lot of mindset shifts there. Again, that could be a whole nother episode on just the mindset and the nuances behind
yeah.
visibility.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Nina, for joining me today. And
Yes.
if anyone would like to
Thank you.
contact
My
Nina,
pleasure.
yeah, to work with you, what would be the best way for them to work with you in achieving their podcast guesting goals?
So the best way to work with me, if you are interested, is to book that 3 hour workshop where we are going to sit together. We are going to personalize everything for you and your business. But before that, we can hop on a discovery call because I understand there is an investment. You need to make sure that we are a good fit for each other, and we can have a conversation to see if, yes, we are in alignment because, I like to work with people who really want to learn from me and who I feel they are a good fit for me.
Mhm.
So we can have this conversation on Zoom and we can see how we can move forward.
Perfect, perfect, and yeah, I just wanna point out that that is a one-on-one 3-hour workshop.
Yes,
It's not
yes. Just
a,
you and
"Hey, we've
me.
got a bunch of people in here,
No,
and I'm just listening to a video."
no, 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 no. I like doing things one on one because people might have questions. We will tailor everything for their business. We are going to search for the right business for the right podcast for their business.
Amazing.
So yes, it's also about taking action. It's not just listening to videos because I'm sometimes guilty of that. I sign up for things, just watch the videos, but then don't do the work. But in this session, we are going to start doing some work as well because I want to give you some feedback on how you write your pitch.
Perfect. I absolutely love that.
Yes,
That's the way I love to work together too, because it provides that accountability, that container, the
exactly.
results, and not just, hey, you're listening to a 3-hour workshop. Now you've got homework. It's like, no, this is a working session. This is getting work
Exactly.
done during that time. Love it. All right.
Yes.
So make sure that you are connecting with Nina, following her, making sure that you are in this world, because let's be honest, you can watch this episode, you can tune in, you can have all of the best intentions, but if you don't mark your calendar to actually do the work, most likely it's not going to happen. So we need to hold that accountability for ourselves, make sure that we're putting what we want in front of us so that we can work towards that. And stay tuned. We have more guests coming to help you grow your business, whether it's strategy or mindset. I'll see you next time. I'm Izzy, and go do some work and make your dreams happen.